This, in my opinion, is the tragedy of Terraforming Mars. If Geek is any measure of a game's popularity, Terraforming Mars still holds a position at number 4 overall, while Cryo holds a position at a modest 2,946. So, why am I even comparing these two vastly different games? Well, I love board games, but you know what my favorite thing is? My favorite thing is discovering underrated games with brilliantly implemented themes and sharing them with my friends. So in this video, I'm going to discuss both games using a 5-component rating system. However, I am going to let my bias show a little bit and claim that Terraforming Mars is way overrated, while Cryo deserves a lot more attention. Before I get started, because I love finding underrated games, if you would like to share your favorite underrated game, or if you can even compare it to a more renowned overrated game, please do so in the comments, or go over to theperfectboardgame.com, which is my personal project. Search for a game that you love, give it a rating. You can sign in using Google Sign In. It's very easy. And if you happen to disagree with me, you can also go to theperfectboardgame.com and change the ratings on there. It's all crowdsourced rating system. That being said, let's go ahead and compare Terraforming Mars and Cryo. There's a 5-component rating system, and those components are mechanics, theme, luck, strategy, and complexity. By the way, because Terraforming Mars is a lot more well-known than Cryo, I'll glaze over Terraforming Mars a little bit more, and I'll go a little bit more in-depth about Cryo, just because I recognize that most people aren't going to be as familiar with Cryo. So the first component we're going to talk about is theme. Now, in Terraforming Mars, the theme is in the name, and I am sure the reason the game is so successful, and really what I like about this game, is the amount of scientific detail that has gone into what would be involved in order to terraform Mars. There's just a huge amount of care that goes into making the game seem like a scientific game. Not to mention, the surface of the planet, the actual board game itself, is geographically based off of the surface of Mars, which just makes it that much more attractive. So thematically, this game is really impressive. However, there is a caveat, which I'll get to in a minute. I want to do a comparison to Cryo. So in Cryo, you are competing with the other shipmates of a spaceship that has crash landed on a planet and split up into 4 parts. And this planet is not inhabitable, so the only way that you'll survive is by building a kind of colony under the surface of the ground. When the sun goes down, the planet freezes over and all life will perish. So there is a set amount of time during which you can scavenge the wreckage on the planet and then transfer your crew, which are in the cryostasis pods, and get them underground where they can survive when the sun sets. And the way you do this is by flying your drone ships to the different parts of the wreckage, and at every part of the wreckage, you can do certain actions that will help you get the resources that you need in order to either rescue crew members or build vehicles and get enough energy to send those vehicles underneath the surface of the planet. And then a subplot to that overarching theme is that you and your opponents are all fighting with each other because each one of you is blaming the other one for the crash that got them there in the first place. So there is sabotage going on, there's a lot of competition, it's every man for themselves, and it plays really nicely. So thematically, they're similar in that they're both space-themed games, but in one game you're trying to make the planet inhabitable, and in the other game you're just trying to survive and fight anybody who gets in your way. I haven't told you the theme score for either of these games yet because I think in order to understand how that's rated, you really have to compare to the mechanics of the game and the implementation of the game. Because Terraforming Mars, while it has all of these wonderful things going for it, the mechanic that drives everything is card drafting. Now, if you're familiar with the game, you're going to say it's not a card drafting game unless you use the card drafting variant, but I would claim that it is a card drafting game for at least 2 reasons. One, because that's how the game plays best with the card drafting variant. And two, even when you don't use the variant, every round when you're looking at your hand of cards, you still have to select which cards you're going to pay for and which cards you're going to discard. So effectively, you're still card drafting. You're just card drafting with yourself. This, in my opinion, is the tragedy of Terraforming Mars, because the flavor text of the entire rulebook describes how this terraforming process is going to take several generations, and it's going to take lots of planning in order to see this through from the beginning to the end. And so you have this setup that promises that you're going to have a game that involves a lot of planning, and yet each generation or each time you're looking at cards, you're just dealing with whatever you were dealt. That shouldn't be the way the game is. I mean, if you do a comparison, for example, to a totally unrelated game, by the way, but if you look at Food Chain Magnate, in Food Chain Magnate, you lay out the cards in a hierarchy and you work your way up a hierarchy as you select your strategy. And it takes some time to set up the tableau, but you can strategize through this process that takes time. In Terraforming Mars, there's none of that. You shuffle the deck, you can get any card on the very first round. Technology doesn't work that way. There needs to be some sort of progression. I wish that there were age cards. Like, I mean, you even think about Through the Ages, where you have 3 different ages of cards. There needs to be that in Terraforming Mars. And that is my biggest issue with the game. It's the wrong mechanic for the game. They've put so much care, like it's very clear that in the designer's intention, more care has gone into the theme than into the mechanics. So the way that I'm rating that is I'm giving it a high theme score. I'm giving it a theme score of an 8, but I'm giving it a mechanics score of a 3. And I don't think I would normally give a mechanics score of a 3 to a game that has this much going on, but it's not the right mechanic for the game. So that's how I rate it. 8 for theme, 3 for mechanics. But if you look over at Cryo, the mechanic there is worker placement. Instead of little meeples, though, you're moving these very well-made plastic drones. And the drones fly from your platform out into the wreckage, and they perform an action there. And then when you bring them back, you have different platforms or landing pads where the ship can perform another action based on where you place it. The platform can be built over the course of the game. So each of the actions can be designed to suit your own strength. You can think of it as you are making your own player mat. A lot of other games, you receive a player mat, you get a company when you're playing Terraforming Mars. In Cryo, everybody gets the same mat, but they customize it through their actions, which I think is brilliant. And it makes a lot of sense because what it represents is there are all these broken parts across the surface of the planet. You're sending out your drone to go pick up some broken parts. You're bringing it back to your platform, and then you're over there with your technology building some kind of machine that can help you and your scientists survive. Then you look at these vehicles. So the vehicles are actually played on cards, and every card in Cryo has 3 abilities. You can play the vehicle, you can play the upgrade, or you can play the objective. And so that's really a great way to balance out or mitigate for luck, because you could draw 3 of the same vehicles, and rather than complain that you've got 3 of the same card, you can play this one for an upgrade, this one for your vehicle, and this one for an objective. And it actually works very, very nicely. I think there's only 8 different cards. Another thing that works really well is Cryo is not a point salad game. You are not scoring victory points. You're trying to get the crew members to survive, and it's tough to make sure that you can get as many people as possible under the surface of the planet. So mechanically, you really get a sense that the mechanics are spot on for the game. Thematically and mechanically, the game is coherent through and through. So I give, for Cryo, a 9 for theme and a 9 for mechanics. So the next component is luck. Very simple to discuss luck now that I've talked about the mechanics in depth. Now, in Terraforming Mars, there's luck in the game because of the cards that you draw, but you mitigate for that luck because you're drafting everything. I'd say that it's fairly balanced and give it a medium score of about a 5. Whereas in Cryo, there is luck in the way the board is set up, and there are cards, but because there are so few cards, seems like there's very little luck at all, which in my personal opinion is the formula for a great game. For luck, I give Cryo a 3. For strategy. Now, in Terraforming Mars, there are a lot of things to consider. You have to budget for the cards that you want to keep, the cards you want to play, and even though I really railed on it for not being a game that enables you to plan a lot, when you do get dealt a hand of cards, you do have to actually consider, here's a card that I won't be able to play for several rounds. Is this something that's worth keeping with the hopes that I'll be able to play it later? And you really have to weigh carefully those decisions because you can't afford to keep every good card you come across. So there is a lot of complexity there. I would say for complexity, it's about a 6 or a 7, which is a pretty good score. I think Cryo has a similar score, maybe not as high. Resources are very tight in the game, and you're constantly weighing whether or not you want to take an action that's going to be a long-term benefit to help you build an engine, or if you want to junk something in order to get a short-term benefit in order to get resources so that you can do something immediately. But nevertheless, I don't think it's quite as strategic as Terraforming Mars. I would give Cryo a 6. And then finally, complexity. Now, I think both games are very similar in this, and I've talked a lot about why they're about medium to mid-high complexity, but Terraforming Mars has a lot more to think about, and it has a lot more overhead, which I think gives it a complexity of about a 7. And actually, to me, I don't think it's a value that pays off. I really like complex games, but if I play a complex game, I want it to be satisfying. Terraforming Mars is not satisfying enough to justify the complexity, in my opinion. Cryo does not have as much overhead at all, so it's a simpler game in that regard, but still, like, considerable. I would say in complexity it's a 5, maybe a 6, and the payoff, in my opinion, is fantastic. Thematically, I think the game is so well implemented and everything makes so much sense that I am happy to play Cryo anytime. Whereas Terraforming Mars is a game that I think I'm through playing. This, however, is not a sponsored video in any way. I am just sharing a game that I really love, which is Cryo. So if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to check out theperfectboardgame.com. Your participation on that site is really appreciated because I really want to build that into a useful tool, and I can't do that without more voices from people like you. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.